Hello, and welcome to Educating the Underdiagnosed, Lived Experience as an Autistic Female. My name is Rebecca Kinsinger. I didn't always know I was autistic. That's the thing about knowing something. When it comes to knowing, we only have access to what we're exposed to in most regards. I lived in a particularly small town in a province in a decade when autism was not as forefront a topic as it is today. My parents weren't exposed to a knowledge of autism, which is what I would later be diagnosed with. Certainly from my personal experience, no professional during any of my school years ever suggested autism as a cause of some of my strengths in class or the reason for any of my challenges. Looking back, however, is a lot different because now I have been exposed to a greater understanding of autism. There is no scenario in which I don't recognize my younger self as autistic. The traits and signs of autism were there the whole time, and all over the place. I lined up toys and organized them a lot when playing. And when I chose to read books, I read only books from specific authors or series. I played a single video game from its inception in 1991 to its current version in 2019. And no other computer game have I played to that extent. I immediately couldn't stand the sound of specific things, like the sound a vacuum makes, or my sister eating her food. The smells of bacon and perfumes agitated me so much I verbalized my frustration in random ways that often confused or upset my family members, instead of just asking for an accommodation for that sensitivity. I wore the same clothes over and over because it was agonizingly uncomfortable if I didn't. I experienced echolalia often as a child, which is repeating words or phrases. This echolalia stood out to my mom mostly because I would repeat the things she said in the car over and over as we were driving to school in elementary, and it would easily annoy her. My mom did not understand how pleasing it was to repeat the phrases she was saying over and over. My other repetitive behaviors were often redirected because it didn't fit function or the social situation. I had select topics I was interested in and liked to talk about them for a very long time. Still, when it came down to other people's interests, I was not so talkative and eager. I did not look at people in the face all the time, certainly not enough for them. It was constantly mentioned. So how did I grow up without a diagnosis? Well, part of me still isn't sure how I did, and that part wishes that I hadn't. But the other part of me has some ideas. In 1987, when I was taking kindergarten for the second time, because I wasn't ready the first time, there were likely no intervention programs for autism and little to no screening tools for autism in my community of less than 4,000 population. I have kept a lot of report cards even dating back to elementary school, remarking on behaviors and characteristics that stood out from typical behavior. Still, no one knew enough about the autistic spectrum to connect my traits to it. What growing up without a proper diagnosis did in my life was to put a lot of pressure and stress onto me to figure things out for myself. The things I was trying to learn by myself were things that are extremely difficult for a child to accomplish alone. Essentially, I was navigating a domestic life, educational life, and social life without a lot of the skills that came naturally to my family members, peer groups, and just people all around me at any given time. As a child, it felt like a race to catch up on something else that everyone had already learned and that I was consistently erroring in. So to cope very quickly in life as an autistic female, I learned to mimic others, camouflage myself, and fly under other people's radars. For example, even the way I chose to dress myself seemed to separate me from my peers. So I was often trying to adapt my style while staying inside my comfort zone. I just want to say about style, I was not successful in this endeavor until much later in my 20s. The challenge of navigating social relationships caused me a lot of anxiety, which I masked with meltdowns, shutdowns, and more camouflaging. I started experiencing headaches early in school, and those continue even now when I'm in a situation where I am processing too much. I don't remember experiencing my first panic attack until I was in grade 12 English class. I was just beginning a book presentation in front of the class that I had over-prepared for. That's right, I had over-prepared for a presentation on a book called Alice in Wonderland. I was supposed to give a brief on the book and its symbolism in 10 minutes or less, which I couldn't manage to do. In fact, I had prepared overhead sheets, an introduction song, White Rabbit by Jefferson Airplane, and many pages on what I considered the levels of symbolism in the book. It was unlikely I would do the presentation in 10 minutes, and more likely that I might greater than double the time. Sometime during the introduction song, while I was preparing the overhead sheets, I started to feel disoriented. I was feeling lightheaded and the room felt really bright. I could hear myself talking, but I did not feel like I was in control of the talking. I could just hear my voice talking. I was so disoriented that all of this really stressed me out. So I ran. I ran right out of school, off the property, into the public library, and I hid there until the school day was over. Something else had also happened, and it was that I couldn't speak. I had become nonverbal for an extended period during this experience. I probably should have told my parents about all of it, about the presentation, the running out of school, the not being able to speak for hours, and how the whole time I felt locked inside my head. I now know that not being able to express emotions and articulate them to others can sometimes be called Alexithymia, which is characterized by a difficulty to identify, distinguish, and describe emotions to other people. Alexithymia is a subclinical phenomenon that greatly overlaps the autistic spectrum, and around 50% of autistic people experience it. I think if I had a diagnosis of autism back in my developmental years, I could have been more prepared for an event like this. And the fallout from it would have been a lot less impactful on my life and health. This, and reasons like this, are a strong motivator for my advocating today. I advocate for women and girls to get the proper diagnosis they need so that they have access to the information and resources that will help them succeed and experience health in their lives. There are a lot of ways to journey through life, but right now there are a lot of females on the autistic spectrum who do not have a proper diagnosis. Commonly, they are misdiagnosed with a mental illness when they do not have one, and being treated with pharmaceuticals they do not need. What would make a lot of difference in the way we address this problem is including more females in studies about autism. Specifically, if those studies were about the female phenotype of autism and what it looked like in comparison to the male phenotype. And then if those results in the studies were incorporated into diagnostic material. Clinicians and diagnosticians need to become increasingly aware of the differences in presentation of autism between females and males, so that women and girls aren't just going most of their lives without a diagnosis of autism and missing out on the value of what that diagnosis could mean to them and the families taking care of them. Advocating for autistic people and their families across Canada is something I can do pretty endlessly at this point in my life. It gives me real happiness and a sense of purpose. I am working with a future-forward organization which focuses on a national autism strategy. I want to make sure that the future for autism is recognized on a national level, and that the current barriers between the provinces and territories do not continue to inhibit the successes of the autistic community. There is another component of a national autism strategy which I think is important, and it is the way that we acknowledge all that we know about the autism spectrum and share it with others in our country, so that people are not feeling ignorant of such a large community of Canadians. There are a lot of people out there who do not know enough about autism, and they want to. They need access to accurate and timely information so that they can relate to, employ, and otherwise engage with the autistic people in their lives. A national autism strategy improves the communication of what the autistic community's needs are throughout the country so much better than what we have in place currently. I also think we need as many voices from the autistic community as we can to build a healthy national autism strategy, because as we say, nothing about us without us. I didn't always know I was autistic. That's the thing about knowing something. You know when you find out. When I found out I was autistic, my life changed. I needed help from some people to change my life and tell me about autism. I eventually found my true diagnosis, and I am a much, much healthier person for it. On my life's journey, you could say a fork in the road formed, and I took it. I am not someone who doesn't look back. I look back on my life often, reflecting down that old road. But when I turn around again and keep moving forward, I know I'm in the right shoes, on the right path, going in the right direction. There are a lot of people out there who are still trying to find their path, and I want to help them if I can. Thank you for listening to my story, and I'll take any questions if you have them.